There is a force, an ancient practice that has shaped the destinies of kings, prophets, and world changers. It is not magic, nor is it superstition. It is a divine principle established for those who desire greater clarity, breakthrough, and dominion in life. That force is fasting, a discipline that separates the ordinary from the extraordinary, the weak from the strong, and the powerless from the powerful. Fasting is not just about food, it is about focus. It is not about suffering, it is about sharpening your spirit. When properly understood and applied, fasting can transform lives, elevate destinies, and unlock doors that seemed forever closed. Let us explore 8 key principles that reveal the undeniable power of fasting. 0.1.f. Fasting is a discipline of spiritual giants. History has shown that those who fast are those who lead. Every major faith, every spiritual revival, and every great movement has been shaped by men and women who understood this secret. Moses fasted for 40 days before receiving the 10 Commandments, laws that shaped civilization. Jesus fasted for 40 days before stepping into his public ministry, and from that moment forward, the world was never the same. Daniel fasted, and he received divine wisdom that made him 10 times greater than the wisest men of Babylon. Fasting is a discipline of champions. It is the secret training ground of those who desire supernatural influence and impact. If you want to rise above the ordinary, you must embrace what ordinary people avoid. History is marked by individuals who understood the power of fasting. These were not ordinary people. They were visionaries, reformers, and leaders who changed the course of nations. Every great movement, every major breakthrough in spiritual history was preceded by fasting. Moses ascended Mount Sinai and fasted for 40 days before receiving the 10 Commandments, the very foundation of moral law. This was not a casual practice. It was a sacred act that prepared him to stand in the presence of God. The wisdom and revelation he received shaped not only a nation, but the entire world. Without that period of fasting, would he have been spiritually prepared for such a monumental encounter? Jesus, the greatest example of divine power on earth, began his ministry with a 40-day fast in the wilderness. Before performing miracles, before calling disciples, before standing against the forces of darkness, he first subdued his own flesh. Satan came to tempt him at his weakest physical state, but his spirit was stronger than ever. He did not break under pressure because he had already conquered himself. Fasting gave him mastery over his desires, proving that true power is found in self-denial. Daniel, a man of extraordinary wisdom, fasted regularly. When taken captive to Babylon, he refused to eat the king's rich foods and instead chose a diet of vegetables and water. This act of fasting not only kept him physically healthy, but also increased his spiritual insight. Later, when seeking divine revelation, he fasted for 21 days. The result? An angel visited him, delivering prophetic messages that would foretell the rise and fall of empires. Fasting is not for the weak. It is the practice of those who desire to operate at a level higher than the natural. It is a discipline of kings, prophets, and those who refused to live an average life. It is for those who understand that temporary discomfort leads to lasting dominion. Throughout history, even outside of religious circles, fasting has been used by leaders seeking greater mental clarity and discipline. Ancient warriors fasted before battles, believing it made them sharper and more focused. Scientists and philosophers have testified that periods of fasting led to their greatest breakthroughs. If the most powerful figures in history practice fasting, why should anyone seeking success ignore it? The body always seeks comfort, but nothing great is birthed in comfort. Fasting teaches self-restraint, and self-restraint is the foundation of true leadership. A person who can deny themselves food for a period can deny themselves destructive habits, harmful relationships, and short-term pleasures that lead to long-term pain. Many today lack discipline because they have never truly denied themselves anything. When hunger calls, they answer. When cravings arise, they obey. Their body controls them instead of the other way around. But those who practice fasting develop a different mindset. They train themselves to be led by purpose, not by appetite. Fasting is a forgotten weapon. Those who understand its power rise above those who live by indulgence. Those who embrace it walk in a strength that others do not understand. If you desire to operate at a higher level, whether spiritually, mentally, or emotionally, fasting is the gateway. The modern world is filled with distractions. From the moment people wake up, they are bombarded with noise, emails, notifications, advertisements, social media. The mind is constantly overstimulated, leaving little room for deep thought or spiritual sensitivity. It is no wonder so many struggle to make wise decisions. Fasting silences the noise. When the body is in a state of fasting, the mind becomes sharper, the spirit becomes more sensitive, and priorities become clearer. Without the constant process of digestion occupying energy, the body redirects its focus. Scientists have discovered that fasting increases mental clarity, enhances cognitive function, and improves memory. But beyond the biological benefits, fasting creates spiritual alignment. A person struggling with confusion, unable to make an important decision, often needs to step back from the noise. Fasting forces that pause. It removes distractions and creates space for reflection. Many who have fasted testify that during their time of self-denial, ideas flowed effortlessly, solutions became clear, and problems that once seemed impossible suddenly had answers. A businessman facing financial ruin once shared how fasting changed his situation. He was overwhelmed, unable to think clearly, and on the verge of bankruptcy. Out of desperation, he decided to fast. On the third day, he experienced a breakthrough. A strategy that had never crossed his mind suddenly became obvious. He implemented it, and within months, his business was thriving again. Spiritual clarity is often drowned out by physical indulgence. The more a person feeds their flesh, the duller their spirit becomes. But when the body is denied, the spirit awakens. Many of history's greatest inventors, philosophers, and visionaries fasted regularly, not just for religious reasons, but because they understood that it heightened their ability to think deeply. When seeking divine direction, fasting is a direct line to clarity. Scripture shows that every time individuals sought major decisions from God, they fasted. Esther fasted before approaching the king, knowing that her decision could save or doom her people. The early church fasted before appointing leaders, recognizing that their choices would impact generations. Even today, those who incorporate fasting into their decision-making process testify of supernatural wisdom and unexplainable insight. The noise of life can cloud judgment. Fasting clears the fog. It forces introspection, making people examine their true motives, desires, and goals. Many have entered fasts thinking they needed one thing, only to discover they needed something entirely different. Fasting reveals hidden truths about oneself, about circumstances, and about the will of God. Beyond decision-making, fasting also brings emotional clarity. Many people react to situations based on emotions rather than wisdom. When faced with stress, frustration, or anxiety, they turn to food, entertainment, or distractions rather than addressing the root issue. Fasting strips away these coping mechanisms, forcing a person to confront their inner struggles. It is in these moments of weakness that true strength is developed. Those who fast regularly develop a mindset of focus and discipline. They are not easily swayed by temptations, distractions, or emotional impulses. Their minds are trained to prioritize what matters. They see the bigger picture rather than being consumed by temporary frustrations. Fasting is a reset button for the mind and spirit. It removes excess, declutters the soul, and brings a level of clarity that few experience. Those who practice it consistently walk in greater wisdom, make better decisions, and live with purpose. In a world filled with noise, those who fast hear clearly. In a world filled with confusion, those who fast walk with certainty. In a world filled with distractions, those who fast remain focused on what truly matters. Some struggles are not defeated by willpower alone. There are addictions, patterns, and weaknesses that persist despite best efforts. Many people battle the same issues for years, whether it be unhealthy cravings, destructive relationships, or secret sins, because these strongholds are deeply embedded in both the mind and body. Fasting is a spiritual tool that disrupts these cycles, exposing their power and removing their hold. A man who struggled with addiction for over a decade tried everything to break free, He attended programs, sought counseling, and made resolutions, but nothing lasted. After a friend encouraged him to fast, he committed to a 3-day fast, seeking God's help. By the second day, he noticed something shifting. His mind was clearer, and the urge that once controlled him felt distant. After 7 days, the craving that once seemed impossible to resist had lost its grip. What years of struggle could not accomplish, fasting did in a week. Fasting is not just about withholding food. It is about weakening the control of the flesh. The body craves comfort, routine, and indulgence. When a person repeatedly gives in to impulses, they reinforce habits that become difficult to break. Fasting interrupts this process. By saying no to food, a person trains their mind and body to submit to discipline rather than desire. This self-mastery extends beyond hunger. It applies to every area of life. Many struggle with negative thought patterns. Fear, anxiety, doubt, and insecurity often dominate the mind, shaping decisions and emotions. These are not just passing feelings, they are strongholds that keep people trapped in mediocrity and self-destruction. Fasting resets the mental framework, creating space for renewal. When a person fasts, they replace negative thoughts with divine truth, allowing their mind to be rewired. Unforgiveness is another stronghold that fasting can break. Holding on to past hurts poisons the soul, robbing people of peace and joy. A woman who had been deeply wounded by betrayal struggled with resentment for years. She knew she needed to forgive, but could not find the strength. When she decided to fast, she found herself in deep reflection. The pain she once clung to began to loosen. By the end of her fast, she experienced a breakthrough. Her heart was free from the burden of bitterness. There are battles that cannot be won through reasoning or effort alone. Jesus made this clear when his disciples failed to cast out a demon. When they asked why, he responded, "This kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting." Matthew 17:21. Some spiritual battles require fasting because it dismantles the hidden forces that keep people bound. It weakens the influence of temptation and strengthens the authority to overcome darkness. Fasting also breaks dependence on worldly comforts. Many people turn to food, entertainment, or distractions whenever they feel stressed, bored, or lonely. These coping mechanisms become emotional crutches, preventing true healing. When a person fasts, they strip away these distractions and confront what is really inside. This process brings inner healing and emotional freedom. Strongholds thrive in an environment of indulgence, but they crumble in the presence of fasting. When the body is denied, the spirit gains strength. Those who struggle with habits they cannot control, thoughts they cannot escape, or emotions they cannot master will find that fasting is not just an option, it is a necessity. The more a person feeds the flesh, the duller their spiritual senses become. The noise of daily life, the distractions of entertainment, and the constant consumption of physical things create a barrier that makes it hard to hear God. Fasting removes this barrier, heightening spiritual awareness and opening the heart to divine guidance. A young man once faced a major life decision. He had multiple career opportunities but felt lost, unsure which path to take. Seeking clarity, he fasted for 3 days. During his fast, he experienced a deep sense of peace about one particular option, even though it seemed less attractive than the others. He chose that path, and years later, he looked back, realizing it had been the best decision of his life. The clarity he received during fasting led him to his true calling. Throughout Scripture, those who needed divine direction fasted before making decisions. The early church fasted before appointing leaders, ensuring they were guided by God rather than human reasoning. Paul and Barnabas fasted before embarking on their missionary journeys. These were not mere traditions, they were intentional acts that sharpened their ability to discern the will of God. Fasting also increases discernment. Many people make poor choices because they are influenced by emotions, peer pressure, or deceptive appearances. When fasting, the spirit becomes more sensitive to truth. A woman once found herself drawn to a business deal that seemed perfect. However, during a fast, she felt an unshakable hesitation. Trusting that inner prompting, she walked away from the deal. Months later, she discovered that it had been a scam. Fasting had protected her from disaster. The ability to recognize divine opportunities and avoid traps is a direct result of spiritual sensitivity. Some people struggle in life not because they lack talent or effort, but because they make decisions based on surface-level reasoning rather than spiritual discernment. Fasting corrects this imbalance. Another effect of fasting is an increase in awareness of God's presence. Many people go through life feeling distant from God, struggling to connect with Him. This is often due to the clutter of daily distractions. When fasting, the noise of life fades and the voice of God becomes clearer. Elijah experienced this when he fled to the wilderness after facing intense opposition. He fasted for 40 days, and in that time, he encountered God, not in a loud spectacle, but in a still, small voice. That whisper. Many believers read Scripture but struggle to grasp its deeper meaning. During a fast, the Word comes alive in ways that it never did before. Passages that once seemed ordinary suddenly carry profound revelation. This is because fasting removes spiritual dullness and allows for deeper understanding. Prophets and intercessors often fast to heighten their ability to hear from God. The clearer their spiritual senses, the more accurately they can discern what God is saying. In times of crisis, when nations face turmoil and families need direction, those who fast become voices of wisdom and insight. The world is full of voices, news, opinions, and endless sources of information. But there is only one voice that truly matters. Those who fast create space to hear it. Those who make it a lifestyle walk with an awareness that others lack. Fasting is not about starving the body. It is about feeding the spirit. The less a person relies on physical satisfaction, the more they rely on spiritual truth. And when spiritual senses are sharpened, life becomes clearer, decisions become wiser, and purpose becomes undeniable. Spiritual power is not automatic. Many people desire to see breakthroughs, walk in authority, and experience supernatural intervention, but they lack the discipline that unlocks these things. Fasting is a direct channel to divine power because it aligns a person with God's will, weakens the flesh, and strengthens the spirit. Jesus demonstrated this truth at the start of his ministry. Before he performed a single miracle, he fasted for 40 days in the wilderness. The Bible makes an important distinction. He went into the wilderness led by the Spirit. But he returned in the power of the Spirit, Luke 4:14. The fast did more than prepare him. It activated a new level of authority. After his fast, demons trembled at his presence, sickness fled at his command, and nature obeyed his voice. Power is not given to the lazy. Those who walk in true authority have paid a price in the secret place. Fasting is part of that price. When a person fasts, they strip away reliance on the physical and deepen their dependence on the spiritual. This creates an atmosphere where divine power flows freely. In the book of Acts, the early church fasted often, and as a result, they walked in extraordinary power. Peter's shadow healed the sick. Paul cast out demons with a word. Entire cities were transformed because they were spiritually charged through fasting and prayer. Their influence did not come from talent, education, or connections. It came from divine empowerment. Fasting also strengthens the ability to overcome spiritual opposition. When Jesus' disciples were unable to cast out a certain demon, he revealed why. This kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting. Matthew 17:21. Some battles require more than prayer alone. There are levels of resistance that only break when fasting is added. A missionary once shared how fasting changed the course of an entire village. He had preached the gospel there for months with little response. The people were spiritually hardened and darkness ruled the region. Feeling led to fast, he withdrew for several days. When he returned, something had shifted. The very people who had mocked him before now listened intently. Many gave their lives to God, and the village experienced transformation. What logic and persuasion could not accomplish, fasting did. Many believers live below their potential because they do not tap into the power that fasting releases. They struggle with obstacles that should have been removed, fight battles that should have been won, and remain stagnant when they should be advancing. When fasting is embraced, breakthroughs become normal, not rare. Fasting also intensifies the power of prayer. There is a dimension of intercession that is only unlocked through fasting. When Daniel fasted for 21 days, an angel revealed that from the first day he prayed, his request had been heard. However, spiritual resistance delayed the answer. The fast strengthened the spiritual forces working on his behalf, breaking through the delay. There are prayers that have gone unanswered, not because God is unwilling, but because spiritual opposition has not been broken. Fasting fuels prayer with divine energy, making it unstoppable. Those who combine fasting with intercession see mountains move, chains break, and impossible situations turn around. Power is not found in words alone. It is not in religious routines or external appearances. True power is found in those who have emptied themselves through fasting and allowed God to fill them with supernatural strength. Provision is not just about money. It includes wisdom, opportunities, favor, and divine connection. Many struggle in life because they rely solely on their own effort. But when fasting is practiced, it shifts reliance from human ability to divine supply. Scripture is filled with examples of how fasting unlocked supernatural provision. When Elijah was in the wilderness with no food, God sent ravens to feed him. When the widow of Zarephath faced starvation, her obedience to a prophetic word led to an ending supply of oil and flour. When Jesus fasted in the desert, angels came and ministered to him. These were not coincidences. Fasting places a person in a position where God's provision flows freely. A businessman once found himself on the verge of financial collapse. No strategy seemed to work. A woman struggling with debt fasted for 3 days, not asking for money, but for wisdom. During a fast, she received a revelation about how to manage her finances differently. Within months, she was debt-free. The answer had been available all along, but fasting positioned her to see it. Fasting also creates an atmosphere for unexpected blessings. There are testimonies of people receiving job offers, promotions, and financial breakthroughs during or after a fast. This is because fasting invites divine involvement in earthly matters. Supernatural provision is not limited to individuals. It extends to entire communities and nations. In the book of Joel, when the land suffered from drought and economic devastation, the prophet called for a fast. As the people humbled themselves, restoration followed. The once barren land became fruitful and abundance was restored. Some doors remain closed until fasting is applied. Some opportunities do not manifest until the right level of surrender is reached. Many struggle for years with issues that could have been resolved through a single season of focused fasting. Fasting shifts the source of provision from human limitation to divine abundance. It teaches dependence on God rather than personal effort alone. When fasting is embraced, lack is replaced with sufficiency. Confusion is replaced with clarity, and ordinary effort is replaced with extraordinary results. Those who fast consistently do not chase after blessings. Blessings chase after them. The favor, wisdom, and provision they walk in is not because of talent or connections, but because they have aligned themselves with divine principles. Fasting is not deprivation. It is access. It is a key that unlocks resources, wisdom, and breakthroughs that human effort alone can never achieve. Emotional wounds often run deeper than physical ones. People carry pain from past betrayals, disappointments, and losses. And though time may pass, the scars remain. Many suffer in silence, unable to shake off anxiety, depression, or anger. Fasting creates space for healing by allowing the heart and mind to disconnect from distractions and focus on the true source of restoration. A man who had suffered deep rejection in childhood struggled with insecurity for most of his life. No amount of success or validation could fill the void. One day he committed to fasting, not for financial breakthrough or direction, but simply to seek healing. During his fast, buried emotions surfaced, and instead of suppressing them, he allowed God to deal with them. He emerged from that fast transformed. The insecurity that had ruled his life for decades lost its power. Fasting exposes what is hidden. Many people suppress painful emotions, numbing them with food, entertainment, or busyness. When these distractions are removed, unresolved wounds come to the surface. Though uncomfortable, this is necessary for true healing. Fear and anxiety are common struggles. The pressures of life, uncertainty about the future, and past failures often create a cycle of worry. Fasting breaks this cycle by shifting focus from problems to God's presence. When King Jehoshaphat faced an overwhelming enemy army, he declared a national fast. Instead of panicking, he led the people in seeking divine intervention. As they fasted, their fear turned into faith, and a miraculous victory followed. Many people battle depression without realizing that spiritual and emotional burdens are often connected. When Elijah fled to the wilderness after a great victory, he fell into deep despair. He wanted to die. Yet, after a period of fasting, his perspective changed. The weight of hopelessness lifted, and he regained his purpose. Fasting removes the heaviness that clouds the mind, bringing renewed strength and clarity. Unforgiveness is another area where fasting brings freedom. Carrying resentment is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to suffer. It eats away at peace, joy, and relationships. A woman who had been deeply hurt by betrayal struggled with bitterness for years. She knew forgiveness was necessary, but her heart resisted. One day, she chose to fast, asking for the strength to let go. As the fast progressed, she felt a shift. What once seemed impossible became natural. She forgave, not out of obligation, but from a place of genuine healing. Mental clarity is another result of fasting. The constant stream of information, social media, and daily stress can create mental fog. Thoughts become scattered and decisions feel overwhelming. Fasting resets the mind, silencing unnecessary noise and allowing for deep reflection. Many who fast find that their thinking becomes sharper, their creativity increases, and solutions to problems suddenly become clear. Scientific studies have shown that fasting has neurological benefits. It promotes the growth of brain cells, reduces stress hormones, and increases mental resilience. Beyond the physical benefits, fasting creates an environment for spiritual renewal. When the mind is free from distractions, it becomes more receptive to wisdom and truth. Emotional healing is not about ignoring pain, but allowing it to be processed and released. Fasting facilitates this process by slowing down life's pace and creating space for inner restoration. Those who embrace fasting as a tool for healing experience peace that surpasses understanding, replacing burdens with joy and clarity. Many people begin their spiritual journey with zeal, eager to pray, worship, and grow in faith. But over time, distractions, busyness, and complacency dull that passion. The fire that once burned brightly becomes a flickering flame. Fasting rekindles spiritual hunger, restoring a deep desire for God's presence. David wrote, "As the deer pants for the water brooks, so my soul pants for you, O God." Psalm 42:1. This kind of longing is not automatic, it must be cultivated. When a person goes without food, they become physically hungry. In the same way, fasting stirs up spiritual hunger. It reminds the soul of its true need, awakening a deeper pursuit of God. A man who once had a strong prayer life found himself drifting. Days turned into weeks without real connection to God. Feeling dry and distant, he decided to fast. By the second day, something shifted. His prayers became passionate again. Scriptures that once felt routine became alive. His hunger for God returned, stronger than ever. Fasting removes the things that compete for attention. In a world filled with entertainment, distractions, and responsibilities, it is easy for spiritual focus to fade. Many people do not realize how much their spiritual appetite has weakened until they fast. Before the Welsh revival, a group of young men committed to fasting and prayer, crying out for God to move. Soon, entire cities were transformed, churches overflowed, crime rates dropped, and people who had been spiritually cold were set ablaze with passion. Spiritual dryness is dangerous. When passion fades, people become vulnerable to compromise. Small sins become acceptable, priorities shift, and faith weakens. Fasting acts as a reset, pulling the heart back into alignment. It breaks complacency and reignites purpose. Many believers struggle with inconsistency. They start strong but lose momentum. Fasting builds endurance. Just as athletes train their bodies, fasting trains the spirit. It develops discipline, making it easier to remain committed in seasons of difficulty. An important aspect of spiritual hunger is a desire for truth. Many people go through life with a shallow understanding of faith. They hear messages but never experience transformation. Fasting deepens revelation. Scriptures that once seemed ordinary take on new meaning. Insights that were hidden become clear. Those who fast find that their relationship with God moves from routine to personal encounter. Passion for worship also increases during fasting. Many people sing songs without real engagement, but when fasting, worship becomes more than music. It becomes a connection. The heart becomes fully engaged, and the presence of God becomes tangible. The story of Anna in the Bible illustrates this truth. She was a prophetess who spent decades in fasting and prayer, longing for the coming of the Messiah. Because of her devotion, she was one of the first to recognize Jesus when he was brought to the temple as a baby. Fasting has sharpened her spiritual awareness and kept her passion alive even in old age. When spiritual hunger is restored, everything changes. Prayer is no longer a duty, it becomes a delight. Reading scripture is no longer a habit, it becomes a feast. Seeking God is no longer occasional, it becomes a lifestyle. Those who have lost their passion can regain it. Those who feel distant can be restored. The secret is fasting. It is the key that reawakens the heart, refocuses the spirit, and reignites the fire that may have faded. We live in a world full of distractions. Technology, entertainment, and daily responsibilities fight for our attention, making it difficult to hear from God or focus on what truly matters. Fasting silences the noise, sharpens the mind, and aligns our spirit with divine instruction. Consider a man lost in a storm. The winds howl, the rain beats against his face, and he struggles to see. But when the storm calms, his path becomes clear. Fasting clears the storm of distractions so you can hear the still, small voice of God directing your steps. Many of life's greatest decisions, career moves, relationships, spiritual callings, require divine clarity. If you're at a crossroads, unsure of your next move, fasting can open your eyes to solutions you never considered. Some struggles are not broken by effort alone. There are addictions, habits, and weaknesses that will not yield to willpower, but they must bow to fasting and prayer. A man once came to a spiritual leader struggling with a deep-rooted addiction. He had tried everything, rehab, counseling, personal discipline, but nothing worked. Then he was challenged to fast. After 7 days of denying his flesh and seeking God, the desire for that addiction vanished. It was broken not by effort, but by spiritual power. If you are trapped in cycles of sin, depression, or destructive behavior, fasting is a spiritual weapon that can shatter those chains. Just as fasting sharpens focus, it also increases spiritual awareness. The more you suppress the flesh, the more your spirit becomes attuned to divine realities. A businessman once shared how fasting changed his life. He was struggling with his company, making poor decisions and feeling lost. He decided to fast for 3 days. By the second day, ideas and strategies began flowing to him. His spirit was more receptive to wisdom, and his decisions became sharper. Within months, his business turned around. Fasting unlocks spiritual perception. It allows you to discern opportunities, detect deception, and receive divine inspiration. Medical science confirms what Scripture has taught for centuries. Fasting heals the body. When you fast, your body begins a process of detoxification. Damaged cells repair themselves, digestion resets, and energy levels increase. Many chronic diseases today are the result of overconsumption. Too much sugar, too much processed food, too much stress. Fasting gives your body a break, allowing it to heal naturally. Studies show that intermittent fasting can improve metabolism, lower blood sugar, and even reduce the risk of heart disease. The body was designed to fast. When you align with this principle, your health improves, your mind becomes clearer, and your energy is renewed. Throughout history, fasting has turned the tide of impossible situations. In the book of Esther, the Jewish people faced destruction. Esther called for a 3-day fast, and the impossible happened. What was meant to be their downfall became their deliverance. Jehoshaphat and his army faced certain defeat. They fasted and prayed, and instead of fighting, they watched as their enemies destroyed themselves. Fasting moves the hand of God in supernatural ways. If you are facing an impossible situation, fasting can be the key to your breakthrough.